ஆமா, எனக்கு தேவை தமிழ் கலாச்சாரத்தோட ஒரு பொண்ணு.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good day. I am Madam Rose Azino with Teacher Lamin. Today we are going to continue our lecture. Our lecture today will be on the cell membrane and the characteristic of the cell's membrane. For the learning outcomes, at the end of the lecture, students should be able to discuss the essential of the structure and function of the cell's membrane, to describe the properties of cell membranes and explain the mechanism involved in the membrane transport. Lastly, able to explain the mechanism by which substances are moved across the membrane. For the introduction to the plasma membrane, the plasma cell membrane separates the living cell from its non-living surroundings. This is a thin barrier about 8 nanometer thick, which can control the traffic in and out of the cells. Like other membrane, the plasma membrane is selectively permeable, allowing some substances to cross more easily than others. Okay, basically, the structure of the plasma membrane is like a fluid mosaic models. A membrane is a mosaic of the phospholipid, glycolipid, sterols, and protein. Most phospholipid and some protein can drift through the membrane. Okay, this is the diagram of the plasma membrane mosaic models. Okay, you can see here. This is the cell. This is the cross section of the cell. Okay, this is the zoom up of the membrane. Okay, for phospholipid bilayer, it consists of a polar head face towards the outside of the cells, non-polar tail face inward toward of each other. It also consists of cholesterol molecules, okay, which is mainly in the plasma membrane in the eukaryotic cells. Okay, for general function of the plasma membrane, it can be a protective layer of the cells. It also can regulate the transport in and out of the cell or subcellular domain. It also can allow selective receptivity and signal conduction by providing transmembrane receptor that bind signaling molecules. It also regulates the fusion of the membrane with other membrane in the cell, which is via specialized junction. It also can provide a passageway across the membrane for certain molecules, such as in a gap junction. Lastly, plasma membrane also can allow direct cell or organelle motility. For fluidity of the plasma membrane, at the body temperature, the phospholipid bilayer has consistency as like olive oil. So the greater the concentration of unsaturated fatty acid residue, the more fluid the bilayer. Fluidity, which is a quality of flow of freely or how firm and stable the lipid bilayer of the phospholipid layer allows cells to pliable or flexible. So the membrane fluidity is influenced by the temperature and it is constituent. This is the structure of the membrane lipids, which mainly are component of the cell's membrane. It also can give the membrane its fluid properties. Most of the membrane lipids consist of two layers of the phospholipid. For the structure of the membrane lipid, mostly it consists in bilayer form, composed of the two opposing layers of lipid molecules, and it has an emphatic molecule. One is the hydrophilic, which is polar head region. Second is the hydrophobic, which is a non-polar tail region. Okay, this is the structure of the polar or also known as a hydrophilic, which is the head part of the um, phospholipid bilayer. Okay, this is a non-polar or hydrophobic, which is consists of acid, which also known as a tail. This is head, this is a tail. Okay, this part one layer and this part second layer.
You faham tak?
கேப்ல என் ரூம் கார்னர்ல ஒரு பூச்சி கத்துற சவுண்ட் கேட்கும்.
Okay, there are three major classes of the membrane lipid. First is the phospholipid, second is the glycolipid, third is the cholesterol. This is the structure of the phospholipid, which has a one head with a two tail here. Now, if we look at this diagram, this is a plasma membrane. Okay, this is the cross section of the plasma membrane, which we can see here. This is a phospholipid bilayer. And then if we focus on this layer itself, you can see here this is the part of the head of the phospholipid. This is the tail part of the phospholipid. Okay, major classes of the membrane lipid, it consists of the phospholipid and also glycolipid. Okay, this is a very important part in the cell membrane. Okay, phospholipid and glycolipid is a too long and non-polar hydrophobic hydrocarbon chain linked to a hydrophilic head group, which also cholesterol also exists in the membrane lipid, which is embedded in the hydrophobic area in the inner region. It is a lipid which reduces the permeability of the membrane. Okay, now we move to the membrane protein. Membrane protein also important in the cell membrane. It is built up by the phospholipid bilayer with other lipid and diverse of protein. Protein can determine most of the membrane specific function. Okay, there are two populations of the membrane protein. First is the peripheral or known as a extrinsic. Second is the integral, also known as a intrinsic. For peripheral protein, it is not embedded in the lipid bilayer at all. It is loosely bound to the surface of the protein, often connected to other population of the membrane protein. While the integral protein, which is penetrate the hydrophobic core of the lipid bilayer, and also it is part of the hydrophobic region coil into the alpha helix. This is the structure. This is integral protein which is embedded in the phospholipid bilayer. This is peripheral which is loosely attached to the membrane. Next, we move to the function of the membrane protein. There are few types of the membrane protein. There are channel proteins, transport protein, enzymatic protein, receptor protein, cell recognition protein, and also junction protein. So for the first one is the membrane protein. For the first type of the membrane protein is the channel protein. Okay. Channel protein form a tunnel for specific molecule. These channel proteins are only responsible for the passive transport. This is the diagram of the channel protein. Next is the transport protein. It involves in the passage of the molecule through the membrane, sometimes requiring input of the energy. This is the diagram of the transport protein. This is the protein which can allow ATP or some molecules to flow into it. Next is the cell recognition protein. This type of proteins can enable your body to distinguish between your own cell and cell of other organism. So this is the protein which have a specific molecule that can make your cell become very specific, so that your cell can recognize which one is part of your body. Like say bacteria don't have that specific molecule, so your body can recognize this is something foreign cell. Next is the receptor protein, which allow the signal molecule to bind, causing a cellular response. Okay, this is example of the receptor protein, which have a specific structure which can bind to another structure. You know. Okay, next is the enzymatic protein, which is directly participate in the metabolic reaction. It can be produce the protein, it can be digest the protein, something like that. Okay, next is the junction protein. Junction protein can form junction between the cells, which allows cell to cell addition and also communication. This is the figure. This is the example of the junction protein, which these two protein can allow two cells communicate to each other. Okay, for function of the membrane proteins, it can allow the cells to make a transportation, enzymatic activity, signal transduction, intercellular joining, cell recognition, and also attached to the other organelles such as a cytoskeleton and also extracellular matrix. Okay, now we move to the membrane carbohydrates. The cell membrane plays the key role of this in the cell-to-cell recognition. Cell-to-cell recognition is the ability of the cell to distinguish one type of neighboring cell from another. And glycocalyx is a sugar code that facilitates cellular addition, protection, signal reception, and cell-cell recognition. The cell surface of blood is covered with a glycoprotein, such as in a blood grouping, which can specifically make a blood group as a type ABO blood groups. Okay, we take a break. We can continue after this.